I'm so glad you found your way here. Your brain is processing thousands of sounds right now while you rest, filtering what matters from endless noise, deciding what to hear and what to let fade away. You'll discover what happens when all that noise finally stops, and understand why silence might be the most powerful sound your mind can experience. Welcome to Sleepy Science Night. Now settle in. You're in your safe space while your mind quietly seeks what it's been missing all day. Craving rest from constant stimulation, yearning for the peace that only stillness brings. Allow yourself this moment of quiet. We'll journey through 100 psychology facts about silence's hidden power. From the space between sounds where healing begins, to the neural reset that happens in quiet moments, to the bridge between noise and the deepest rest you've ever known. This thoughtful journey through silence builds bridges between tired minds seeking peace. A gentle subscribe, like or sharing your thoughts, creates a pathway for more silent seekers to discover, and brings us closer to protect this sanctuary, one sleepy soul at a time. Your quiet presence here inspires ours. Let yourself settle completely here. Feel your jaw unclench, your breath deepen naturally. You can let these thoughts drift past without holding them. Sense that soothing heaviness enveloping you, like your consciousness slowly dimming its brightness, thoughts dissolving into the peaceful fog of approaching sleep, safe and undisturbed. Close your eyes and breathe deeply. You're floating where thoughts rest safely in gentle darkness. Let your mind merge with infinite peace. And now we begin. Silence is not the absence of sound, it's the presence of space. Recent neuroscience research shows the human brain doesn't process silence as nothing. Instead, when we encounter true quiet, specific brain regions activate to process this absence. The auditory cortex shifts into a different mode, monitoring for potential sounds while maintaining heightened awareness. This suggests silence is something the brain actively experiences, not just a gap between noises. Studies reveal that people can detect silence as precisely as they detect sound, experiencing silences of different lengths the same way they perceive tones. Your brain, it turns out, has evolved to recognize and measure quiet as carefully as it recognizes a voice calling your name. Researchers categorize silence into 3 distinct experiences. Environmental silence occurs when external sound levels drop below 30 decibels, quieter than a whisper, the acoustic space found in remote forests or soundproof rooms. Mental silence happens when the internal narrative, that constant stream of thought, temporarily ceases. Brain scans show this creates unique patterns of neural coherence, where different brain regions synchronize in ways they never do during active thinking. Social silence. The third type emerges in the spaces between conversations, the pauses that carry meaning without words. Communication research shows these social silences activate theory of mind networks, helping us understand others' mental states more accurately than speech sometimes allows. Each type affects the nervous system differently. Each offers its own form of restoration. In complete silence, you begin to hear your own body. Research from the Anecho Chamber at Orfield Laboratories in Minneapolis confirms that when all external sound disappears, people start detecting their own physiological processes. First comes the sound of breathing, then heartbeat, then the rush of blood through vessels near the ears. Some subjects report hearing the grinding of bones in the jaw, the click of joints, even the soft whisper of air moving through the sinus cavities. The human ear is so sensitive that in perfect silence it approaches hearing the random motion of air molecules themselves. This internal soundscape usually goes unnoticed, masked by the constant background noise of modern life. But in true quiet, the body becomes an orchestra playing its continuous symphony of survival. According to the World Health Organization's environmental noise guidelines, the average person in urban areas experiences sound levels between 60 and 85 decibels throughout their waking hours. That's equivalent to living inside a constantly running dishwasher or standing beside a busy road. For perspective, a normal conversation measures around 60 decibels, while a vacuum cleaner reaches 70. Prolonged exposure above 70 decibels triggers stress responses, elevated cortisol, increased blood pressure, heightened alertness. The baseline of modern life keeps the nervous system in a chronic state of mild activation. Research shows that people who live near airports or highways show measurably higher stress hormone levels even during sleep, their bodies never fully entering deep rest. The absence of silence creates a burden the body carries constantly. Most people cannot tolerate extended silence. Studies have found that subjects left alone in a quiet room for just 15 minutes often chose to give themselves mild electric shocks rather than sit with silence and their thoughts. The discomfort wasn't physical, it was psychological. Without external stimulation, the mind turns inward, and for many, this confrontation with unoccupied consciousness feels unbearable. Brain imaging during these quiet periods showed increased activity in regions associated with self-referential thinking and mind-wandering. For individuals unaccustomed to silence, this inward focus can feel exposing. The research suggests our relationship with quiet reflects our relationship with ourselves. The more uncomfortable the silence, the more we may be avoiding something internal. Just 2 minutes of silence can lower blood pressure more effectively than listening to relaxing music. Cardiovascular research published in the journal Heart measured physiological responses in participants exposed to various sounds and silences. Researchers found that the pauses between musical tracks produced more significant decreases in heart rate and blood pressure than the music itself. The effect appears dose-dependent. Longer periods of silence create more pronounced reductions in stress markers. Follow-up studies found that 2 minutes of silence reduced cortisol levels by an average of 14%, while reducing systolic blood pressure by approximately 5 millimeters of mercury. These changes indicate a genuine shift in autonomic nervous system activity, from sympathetic activation toward parasympathetic calm. Complete silence can physically change brain structure. Research published in Brain Structure and Function found that mice exposed to 2 hours of silence daily showed significant growth in the hippocampus, the brain region essential for memory formation. This neurogenesis, the creation of new neurons, occurred specifically in areas associated with memory consolidation and spatial navigation. While direct human studies remain limited, brain imaging suggests similar processes may occur in humans practicing regular periods of deep quiet. The researchers noted that silence appeared more effective at stimulating neural growth than enriched environments or even physical exercise. The implications suggest that quiet isn't passive, it's an active state that allows the brain to rebuild and strengthen itself. When external stimulation ceases, the brain's default mode network activates. Discovered through brain imaging studies, this network includes regions that become more active during rest than during focused tasks. Research suggests this network serves as the brain's integration system, connecting memories, processing emotions, and constructing personal narrative. In silence, this network operates most efficiently, without interference from external demands on attention. Scientists have found that regular periods of silence strengthen connectivity within this network, potentially improving self-awareness and emotional regulation. The default mode, once considered mere idling, now appears to be the state where the mind performs its most important maintenance work. Even in complete silence, your auditory system remains vigilant. Research shows the auditory cortex maintains baseline activity levels approximately 70% of its active state, even when no sound enters the ear. This persistent monitoring allows for rapid response to potential threats, a survival mechanism inherited from ancestors who needed to detect predators during rest. The system operates through specialized neurons that fire rhythmically in quiet, creating a kind of neural readiness. However, prolonged activation of this vigilance network contributes to cognitive fatigue. Studies suggest that only in very deep silence, sustained for several minutes, does this system finally begin to relax, allowing complete auditory rest. This relaxation correlates with subjective feelings of deep peace and restoration. Your brain processes silence as information, not absence. Research demonstrates that people perceive silences between sounds as having duration, content, and meaning, much like they perceive sounds themselves. When researchers presented subjects with patterns of silence and sound, the brain processed both through similar neural pathways. The pauses carried information about timing, emotion, emphasis. This suggests that millions of years of evolution have shaped human perception to extract meaning from quiet, just as readily as from noise. Silence, in other words, is something we actively hear rather than something we simply fail to hear. So what is silence revealing even in these first moments? It's revealing that your nervous system has been carrying a burden you didn't know was there, a constant, low-level vigilance that only becomes obvious when it finally stops. Chronic noise exposure shrinks the brain's ability to process silence. Longitudinal studies following urban residents over several years found that those experiencing daily noise levels above 70 decibels showed reduced gray matter density in auditory processing regions. The effect appeared cumulative. The longer the exposure, the greater the reduction. This structural change correlated with decreased ability to detect subtle sounds and reduced appreciation for quiet environments. The research notes that the brain, in adapting to constant noise, appears to down-regulate its sensitivity to the full acoustic spectrum. This suggests that noise pollution doesn't just disturb momentarily, it fundamentally alters how we experience sound and silence throughout life. Experienced meditators process silence differently than novices. They report a state called relaxed awareness, simultaneously calm and alert, resting yet fully present. Long-term practitioners describe being able to rest in silence for hours without boredom or restlessness, where beginners struggle after minutes. This capacity appears learnable through gradual practice, suggesting that comfort with silence is a skill that develops over time rather than an innate trait. Brain studies show these experienced practitioners enter theta wave states more readily, the frequency associated with deep relaxation and creative insight. True silence, it seems, is something we must learn to inhabit rather than something that automatically brings peace. Natural silence contains what researchers call nature's baseline frequency spectrum. Studies of truly quiet natural environments, remote forests, deserts, mountains, reveal consistent low-frequency sound patterns between 5 and 200 Hz. These sounds, mostly imperceptible to conscious awareness, come from wind, distant water, the rustle of vegetation. Research suggests human physiology appears calibrated to this natural baseline. When subjects listened to recordings of true natural silence, their autonomic nervous systems showed greater regulation than when listening to digital silence or white noise. This suggests our bodies evolved in specific acoustic environments and continue to seek those patterns. Modern silence, free of these natural frequencies, may feel somehow incomplete or unsettling to our ancient nervous systems. Silence creates space between thoughts. Cognitive research measured the temporal dynamics of conscious thought during quiet periods versus periods with background sound or music. Using real-time thought sampling, researchers found that silence increased the gaps between discrete thoughts by an average of 43%. These gaps weren't unconsciousness, but rather states of pure awareness without content. Moments when attention existed without focusing on any particular object. Subjects reported these moments as deeply restful, yet somehow alert. The research suggests that silence allows consciousness itself to become more spacious, less crowded with the constant generation of mental content. At the molecular level, silence affects gene expression. Research examining genetic markers in individuals before and after extended silence retreats found significant changes in genes related to inflammation, stress response, and cellular repair. Specifically, genes associated with pro-inflammatory cytokines showed reduced expression, while genes involved in DNA repair and cellular maintenance showed increased activity. These changes persisted for several weeks after the silence period ended, suggesting lasting biological impact. The mechanism appears to involve reduced cortisol and increased production of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, a protein that supports neuron growth and survival. Silence, at this fundamental level, allows the body to shift from a defensive stance toward a restorative one. Comfortable silence between people indicates psychological safety. Research in social psychology found that the ability to share silence without discomfort correlates strongly with relationship satisfaction and emotional intimacy. Studies measured pause duration in conversations between various types of relationships: strangers, acquaintances, friends, romantic partners. Close relationships could sustain pauses, averaging 7 seconds without anyone feeling compelled to speak, while strangers felt uncomfortable after just 2 seconds. Brain scans during these shared silences showed that in close relationships, the pauses activated social bonding networks, specifically regions involving trust and empathy. The silence became a form of communication itself, conveying acceptance and understanding without words. This suggests that true connection includes the ability to be quiet together, to let silence hold the space between two minds. Silence restores depleted attention. Attention restoration theory proposes that directed attention, the effortful focus required for most modern tasks, is a limited resource that becomes exhausted through use. Natural environments and quiet spaces allow this resource to replenish. Studies using cognitive performance tests found that just 15 minutes in quiet natural settings improved subsequent performance on tasks requiring sustained attention by approximately 20%. The improvement exceeded that from rest periods with background music or urban quiet. The researchers suggest that silence allows attention to recover by eliminating the need to actively filter distracting stimuli. The mind in quiet can simply be without constantly having to choose what to focus on. Silence before sleep enhances dream vividness and recall. Sleep research tracks subjects who spent 30 minutes in silence before sleep versus those who listened to podcasts or music. Those in the silence condition reported significantly more vivid dreams and better recall upon waking. Brainwave monitoring showed that the silence group entered REM sleep faster and spent more time in this dream-rich stage. The researchers hypothesized that silence allows the brain to begin the shift towards sleep-related neural patterns earlier, creating a smoother transition between waking and dreaming consciousness. The pre-sleep silence appeared to act as a bridge, helping the mind release its grip on waking concerns and open to the less structured consciousness of dreams. For millions with tinnitus, the perception of ringing or buzzing in the ears, silence becomes impossible. According to the American Tinnitus Association, approximately 50 million Americans experience some degree of tinnitus, with about 20 million finding it debilitating. Research suggests tinnitus arises when the brain, deprived of certain sound frequencies due to hearing damage, generates its own phantom sounds to fill the gap. This reveals something profound. The brain prefers creating sound to experiencing silence. When the expected acoustic input doesn't arrive, the auditory cortex essentially hallucinates sound rather than accept quiet. For those with tinnitus, external silence paradoxically increases the internal noise, making quiet spaces distressing rather than restful. This condition illuminates the brain's deep dependence on sound for normal functioning. Buddhist psychology describes the untrained mind as monkey mind, constantly jumping from thought to thought like a monkey swinging through trees. Neuroscience research provides a biological basis for this ancient observation. Studies measuring spontaneous thought during meditation found that untrained subjects experienced an average of 15 discrete thought topics per minute during attempted silent meditation. These thoughts rarely connected logically. They jumped associatively, following emotional or sensory triggers rather than rational progression. Brain imaging showed rapid switching between neural networks, with no single network achieving sustained activation. This mental restlessness creates a kind of internal noise that persists even in external silence. The research suggests that true mental quiet requires not just external silence, but training to reduce this internal chatter. Your brain maintains a buffer of recent sounds, even in silence. Research revealed that the auditory cortex preserves a roughly 3-second echo of recent acoustic input. This buffer allows us to make sense of speech and music by holding previous sounds in memory while processing new ones. In silence, this buffer gradually empties, but the neural structures remain primed for several minutes, ready to receive new sound. This explains why sudden sounds after prolonged silence feel especially intense. The auditory system has relaxed its defenses and must suddenly reactivate. The research found that complete auditory system relaxation requires approximately 8 to 12 minutes of sustained silence, longer than most people typically experience in daily life. Introverts and extroverts respond to silence differently at a neural level. Research using personality assessments and brain imaging found that individuals high in introversion showed increased activity in reward processing regions during quiet periods, while extroverts showed decreased activity and signs of discomfort. The difference appears to involve dopamine sensitivity. Introverts may be more sensitive to dopamine and thus find the internally focused state of silence naturally rewarding, while extroverts require more external stimulation to achieve optimal dopamine levels. This suggests that the widespread discomfort with silence in modern culture may partly reflect extroverted norms dominating social expectations. For introverts, silence isn't deprivation but restoration. At the deepest level, accessible to physics, even silence contains motion. Quantum mechanics reveals that what we perceive as empty space or silence actually teems with quantum fluctuations, particles and antiparticles, constantly appearing and disappearing, creating what physicists call quantum foam. While these processes occur far below human perception and don't produce sound as we understand it, they represent a fundamental restlessness in nature itself. Some physicists and contemplatives have drawn parallels between this quantum restlessness and the mind's persistent mental activity. Just as space is never truly empty, perhaps consciousness is never truly silent. This reflection suggests that seeking absolute silence may be seeking something that doesn't exist even in the fabric of reality, and that relative quiet, imperfect and temporary, may be all that's possible or needed. Initiatives at major medical centers have implemented quiet hours in intensive care units, reducing noise levels below 45 decibels during nighttime hours. The results showed patients experiencing these quiet periods had shorter hospital stays, reduced need for pain medication, and better subjective reports of rest quality. Blood pressure measurements showed more stable readings during quiet hours, and stress hormone levels measured in morning blood samples decreased. The mechanism appears to involve allowing the body's repair processes to operate more efficiently without the constant low-level stress of noise-induced arousal. The research supports a growing recognition that silence itself can be therapeutic, a form of medicine that costs nothing but requires institutional commitment to provide. So what is silence revealing? 25 facts in, a pattern emerges. Silence is not empty but full of the body's quiet symphony, the mind's persistent chatter, the nervous system's constant vigilance. It's something the brain actively processes, something the body desperately needs, yet something modern life increasingly fails to provide. The research shows that silence affects us at every level, from genetic expression to neural structure, from attention capacity to relationship depth. It appears to be not a luxury, but a necessity, as fundamental to health as sleep itself. The question now becomes, if silence is so important, what happens when we truly embrace it? What does it actually do to consciousness, to healing, to the possibility of rest? Let's pause here and notice your body. As you breathe out slowly, appreciate each tiny cell inside, trillions of organisms working in silence. Heart beating, lungs breathing, brain thinking, all without your command. Notice the gentle sensations on your skin, in your muscles, along your spine. You are a complete ecosystem, diverse, self-balancing. Now we continue. Silence activates the vagus nerve, the primary channel of the parasympathetic nervous system. This thick nerve bundle originates in the brainstem and extends downward, innervating the heart, lungs, and digestive organs. Research shows that exposure to silence for just 3 minutes increased vagal tone, a measure of parasympathetic activity, by an average of 18%. This increase correlated with reduced heart rate, deeper breathing, and increased heart rate variability, all markers of relaxation and resilience. The vagus nerve essentially acts as a brake on the stress response, allowing the body to shift from fight or flight readiness toward rest and digest mode. Silence appears to be one of the most reliable triggers for this shift. Chronic noise keeps cortisol elevated. Silence allows it to normalize. Cortisol, the primary stress hormone, follows a natural daily rhythm, highest in the morning to help us wake, gradually declining throughout the day, lowest at night to facilitate. Studies found that people living in consistently noisy environments show flattened cortisol curves, with levels remaining elevated throughout the day and failing to drop adequately at night. This pattern is associated with numerous health risks, including cardiovascular disease, depression, and impaired immune function. Research subjects who practiced daily silence for 20 minutes showed restoration of normal cortisol patterns within 2 weeks. The silence didn't eliminate stress, but allowed the body's stress response system to cycle properly, rather than remaining stuck in activation. Silence strengthens immune function. Studies examining immune markers in individuals before and after week-long silence retreats found increased natural killer cell activity. These cells identify and destroy virus-infected cells and tumor cells. The participants also showed reduced levels of pro-inflammatory cytokines, signaling molecules that, when chronically elevated, contribute to autoimmune conditions and accelerated aging. The researchers noted that the immune changes resembled those seen after extended sleep or meditation practice. The mechanism appears to involve the nervous system's influence on immune organs. When the nervous system relaxes deeply, it sends signals that allow the immune system to shift from defensive vigilance toward maintenance and optimization. Your gut bacteria respond to silence. Emerging research discovered that the gut microbiome changes composition based on stress levels. Chronic stress, often maintained by constant noise and stimulation, favors inflammatory bacterial species while reducing beneficial ones. Participants in silence retreats showed shifts toward more diverse and balanced gut bacteria populations within just 5 days. The connection runs through the gut-brain axis, a bidirectional communication pathway linking emotional centers in the brain with intestinal function. When silence calms the nervous system, this calm signals the gut, creating an environment that favors beneficial bacteria. These bacteria, in turn, produce neurotransmitters and metabolites that support mood regulation and mental clarity. Regular silence practice can reduce blood pressure as effectively as some medications. A comprehensive review of studies involving over 3,000 participants who practiced various forms of silence-based interventions found average reductions in systolic blood pressure of 8 millimeters of mercury, with diastolic pressure dropping 5 millimeters. These reductions are clinically significant, sufficient to reduce stroke risk by approximately 14%, and heart disease risk by 9%. The effect appeared dose-dependent, with longer daily silence periods producing greater reductions. Importantly, the benefits persisted only with continued practice. When silence practice stopped, blood pressure gradually returned to baseline over several weeks. Silence reduces systemic inflammation. C-reactive protein, a blood marker of inflammation throughout the body, correlates with risk for heart disease, diabetes, and cognitive decline. Studies measured these levels in office workers randomly assigned to either 30 minutes of daily silence or continuation of their usual routine. After 8 weeks, the silence group showed an average 23% reduction in inflammatory marker levels, while the control group showed no change. Testing revealed that even individuals starting with normal levels experienced reductions, suggesting silence benefits everyone, not just those with existing health problems. The mechanism appears to involve multiple pathways: reduced stress hormones, improved sleep quality, and possibly direct effects on immune system regulation. Silence improves blood sugar control. Studies examined individuals with prediabetes who incorporated 15 minutes of silent rest after each meal. Continuous glucose monitoring revealed that post-meal blood sugar spikes decreased by an average of 15% compared to their usual pattern. The effect persisted throughout the study period and correlated with improved insulin sensitivity markers. The researchers hypothesized that silence-induced parasympathetic activation enhances insulin signaling and glucose uptake by cells. This finding suggests silence may have metabolic benefits beyond its psychological effects, potentially offering a simple adjunct intervention for diabetes prevention. Pre-sleep silence improves sleep quality more than any sleep hygiene practice. Sleep studies compared sleep architecture in participants who practiced different pre-sleep routines: silence, music, guided meditation, or screen time. The silence group showed the most favorable pattern: faster sleep onset averaging 14 minutes versus 22 for other groups, increased time in deep slow-wave sleep, and fewer nighttime awakenings. Sleep efficiency, the percentage of time in bed actually spent sleeping, averaged 92% for the silence group versus 83% for others. The research suggests that silence allows the brain to begin transitioning towards sleep state neural patterns while still awake, creating momentum that carries into deeper and more restorative sleep. Silence increases pain tolerance. Experimental pain research found that subjects practicing 30 minutes of silence before cold pressor tests tolerated the pain an average of 37 seconds longer than controls. The effect appeared to involve both physiological and psychological mechanisms. Psychologically, the practice of sitting with silence may build general distress tolerance, teaching the nervous system that uncomfortable sensations can be observed without requiring immediate reaction. Brain imaging during the pain tests showed that the silence practiced group had reduced activation in emotional pain processing regions, suggesting they experienced less suffering even when experiencing similar pain intensity. In silence, you become aware of your heart. This awareness itself has therapeutic value. Cardiac interoception, the ability to consciously perceive one's own heartbeat, correlates with emotional regulation capacity and self-awareness. Studies found that individuals who regularly practice silence show enhanced cardiac interoception, able to accurately count their heartbeats without taking their pulse. This heightened awareness appears to strengthen the connection between body and mind, allowing for more integrated emotional processing. The insula, a brain region involved in interoception, shows increased gray matter density in regular silence practitioners. This suggests that silence training may physically strengthen the neural circuits that connect physical sensation with conscious awareness. Silence naturally slows and deepens breathing without conscious effort. Respiratory monitoring studies found that subjects in quiet environments spontaneously shifted towards slower, deeper breathing patterns, averaging 7 to 8 breaths per minute, compared to the typical 12 to 16. This slower breathing activates the parasympathetic nervous system and increases heart rate variability, both markers of physiological resilience. Interestingly, subjects weren't instructed to breathe slowly. The change happened automatically in response to the quiet environment. This suggests that silence removes an invisible burden that normally keeps breathing rapid and shallow. When the nervous system no longer needs to maintain alertness against potential threats in the acoustic environment, breathing naturally becomes more efficient and relaxed. Studies reveal that muscles hold unconscious tension that releases only in silence. Research measured electrical activity in the muscles of the neck, shoulders, and jaw during various conditions. Background noise, even at moderate levels of 50 to 60 decibels, maintained baseline muscle tension approximately 30% higher than during silence. Subjects were unaware of this tension. It wasn't painful or noticeable to conscious awareness. Only when silence was introduced did the tension release, sometimes producing spontaneous stretching or yawning as the body adjusted to the new relaxation. This finding suggests that noise creates a constant, subtle physical brace that we carry throughout the day, an invisible armor that only drops when the threat of sudden sound disappears. Even your eyes rest differently in silence. Research found that in quiet environments, eye movements become less frequent and scan patterns less erratic. The eyes make small movements called saccades constantly, even when we believe our gaze is still. These movements increase in frequency and magnitude in stimulating environments, including noisy ones, as the visual system coordinates with the auditory system to scan for relevant information. In silence, particularly with eyes closed, saccade frequency drops by approximately 40%, and the eyes settle into more stable fixation. This reduction in eye movement corresponds with deeper relaxation and appears to contribute to the subjective sense of rest. The eyes, it seems, are always preparing to look toward the source of sound, and only in silence can this vigilance. Finally, ease. Silence improves digestion. The enteric nervous system, sometimes called the second brain, contains more neurons than the spinal cord and regulates digestion largely independently of conscious control. However, it remains sensitive to the autonomic nervous system's state. Studies found that eating in silence versus eating with television or conversation resulted in better gastric emptying rates and reduced reports of bloating or discomfort. The mechanism involves the parasympathetic nervous system's rest and digest function, which diverts blood flow to digestive organs and enhances secretion of digestive enzymes. Noise and stimulation activate the sympathetic fight or flight system, which diverts resources away from digestion. This explains the traditional practice in many contemplative communities of eating in silence. It's not just spiritual discipline, but practical wisdom about how the body works. By fact 40, the pattern crystallizes. The nervous system's default state isn't vigilance, but rest. Millions of years of evolution didn't design human neurobiology for constant stimulation. That's a recent invention, a consequence of the last century's technological acceleration. Our nervous systems evolved for environments where silence was the norm and sound signaled something important: food, danger, social connection. In that context, the stress response was meant to activate briefly, then deactivate, allowing the body to return to its baseline resting state. Modern life inverts this pattern, making stimulation constant and silence rare. The research reveals that silence doesn't create relaxation so much as remove the interference that prevents relaxation. It's not a special state we must achieve, but the natural state we're constantly being pulled away from. Every physiological system improves in silence, not because silence does something to them, but because it finally allows them to function, as they were designed to, in peace. You're still here with me, thoughts still flickering like candlelight. Just notice. Don't judge. Just notice where your mind is. We're exploring silence itself, the very thing that allows these words to land. Strange, beautiful, and perfectly calm. Let's drift onward together. Silence in psychology is like negative space in art. It defines what's present by what's absent. Gestalt psychology demonstrates that the brain perceives patterns by detecting boundaries and contrasts. Sound and silence create a perceptual figure-ground relationship. Each makes the other meaningful. Without silence, sound becomes meaningless noise. Without sound, silence has no reference. This interplay creates the texture of conscious experience. Meditation research shows that experienced practitioners report being able to perceive increasingly subtle distinctions in different qualities of silence. The silence after a bell versus the silence before speech. The charged silence of anticipation versus the empty silence of conclusion. This suggests that silence isn't monolithic, but contains rich phenomenological variety that most people never notice because they never spend enough time in quiet to develop perceptual sensitivity. All contemplative traditions recognize silence as essential for spiritual development. Research examining practices across Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, and indigenous traditions found that periods of intentional silence appear in every tradition, suggesting this practice addresses something universal in human psychology. The silence serves multiple functions. It removes distractions, allowing focus on inner experience. It creates space for insights to emerge without being drowned out by mental chatter. It humbles the ego by removing the primary tool of self-assertion, speech. Comparative studies found that despite different theological frameworks, practitioners across traditions reported remarkably similar experiences during silence, a sense of expanded awareness, connection to something larger than the individual self, and paradoxically, both emptiness and fullness. In psychotherapy, silence is a powerful technique. Research on therapy technique found that experienced therapists use silence strategically, creating spaces where clients can access deeper emotions and insights. These silences, typically 5 to 15 seconds, occur at specific moments after a significant revelation, when a client approaches difficult material, or when the therapist senses something important percolating beneath the surface. Brain imaging of therapy sessions showed that during these silences, clients' brains showed increased activity in self-referential processing regions and emotional integration networks. The silence gave the mind time to synthesize experience, to connect thoughts with feelings, to find words for what had been wordless. Novice therapists often rush to fill silences, uncomfortable with the empty space, but research shows that clients rate therapy sessions with more silence as more valuable and transformative. Silence is essential for creativity. Research on creative problem-solving found that individuals who spent 30 minutes in silence before attempting creative tasks produced solutions rated as significantly more original and useful than those who spent the same time in stimulating environments or doing unrelated activities. The silence appeared to allow what researchers call incubation, unconscious processing that leads to insight. Brain imaging during the silent period showed activation in the default mode network, which supports spontaneous thought and mental simulation. This network appears to need quiet to operate effectively. External stimulation disrupts its processing. The research helps explain why many famous insights reportedly occurred during quiet moments, in the bath, on walks, lying in bed at night. The silence isn't merely absence of distraction. It's presence of the mental state necessary for original thinking. Silence provides necessary space for grief. Research on bereavement found that mourners who incorporated daily silent periods reported more adaptive grief processing and fewer symptoms of complicated grief 6 months after loss. The silence appeared to allow emotional processing without the pressure to perform normalcy or articulate feelings before they were fully formed. In silence, grief could be experienced without explanation or justification. The practice didn't eliminate pain, but created a container where pain could exist without needing to be fixed or understood. This finding challenges the emphasis in Western culture on talking about feelings as the primary path to healing. Sometimes, the research suggests, healing requires the opposite, being quiet enough to feel what's present without words. For those experiencing anxiety, silence practice offers a pathway to healing. Studies found that with graduated exposure and proper support, individuals with generalized anxiety disorder who practiced brief silent periods showed reduced baseline anxiety over time. The key appears to be starting gently, just 2 to 3 minutes initially, and building tolerance gradually. Silence can feel intense at first when the mind is accustomed to distraction, but this intensity often reveals what needs attention. Therapists now incorporate silence-based approaches as complement to traditional talk therapy, recognizing that sometimes healing happens not through speaking, but through learning to be present with whatever arises. The silence in therapeutic context becomes a safe container for difficult emotions to surface and naturally resolve. Silence after learning enhances memory formation. Educational research found that students who spent 10 minutes in silence immediately after learning new material showed better retention 1 week later compared to students who immediately moved to another activity. The effect was particularly pronounced for complex material requiring integration of multiple concepts. The mechanism appears to involve memory consolidation processes that occur during wakeful rest. Brain regions that were active during learning show spontaneous reactivation during subsequent silence, essentially replaying and strengthening the new neural patterns. This suggests that the common practice of moving immediately from one activity to the next without pause may impair learning. The silence isn't doing nothing. It's allowing the brain to complete the process of encoding experience into long-term memory. Prolonged silence can lead to temporary ego dissolution, a psychological state where the boundary between self and environment becomes less distinct. Studies of individuals on extended silence retreats found that many reported experiences of expanded consciousness, diminished sense of separate selfhood, and feelings of unity with surroundings. Brain imaging studies suggest these experiences correlate with reduced activity in brain regions associated with self-referential processing. This doesn't indicate brain malfunction, but rather a shift in how consciousness organizes itself. The constant internal dialogue, the voice that maintains our narrative sense of identity, quiets in extended silence. And without that narrative, the boundaries we normally experience as solid become more fluid. These experiences are temporary and generally considered psychologically beneficial, rather than disturbing. Silence is the best training ground for attention. Modern neuroscience recognizes 2 types of attention: focused attention, concentrating on one thing, and open monitoring, aware of everything without fixating on anything. Research found that silence practice, particularly mindfulness-based approaches, strengthens both types. The mechanism involves strengthening brain regions involved in attention control and increasing connectivity between attention networks and sensory processing areas. Unlike attention training through stimulating activities or games, silence-based training appears to increase the brain's capacity for sustained attention without increasing its dependence on external engagement. This means practitioners become better at focusing when needed, but don't require constant stimulation to maintain alertness. The attention becomes more flexible, more voluntary, more under conscious control. We've reached halfway, 50 facts into this exploration of silence. And what's emerging? Silence is not absence but presence. Presence of the self usually drowned out by noise. Presence of physiological processes usually overridden by stress. Presence of psychological complexity, usually simplified by distraction. The research reveals that silence doesn't create anything new. It reveals what was always there. The calm, the healing, the creativity, the insight, These capacities exist within us constantly, but they cannot manifest in noise. Silence is the condition that allows human flourishing. Not merely a preference or luxury, but a biological and psychological necessity. Modern life, in treating silence as empty time to be filled, may be depriving us of the very thing that allows us to function as we were designed to. The question now shifts from what silence does to what becomes possible when we finally stop doing and simply allow ourselves to be quiet. Let each breath guide you to realize time is yours, a separate stream that only you are living. While thoughts continue to drift and change, this second you're breathing, listening, is unique. Cherish the present moment, knowing that right now, your silence is unique in all of time and space, and we continue drifting in deep silence. Many people report hearing an internal sound, not tinnitus, but what contemplatives call the sound of silence. Research attempting to study this phenomenon found that approximately 40% of experienced meditators report perceiving a high-frequency tone or rushing sound during deep, quiet states. The sound isn't coming from the ears. Brain imaging suggests it may represent the baseline firing of auditory cortex neurons, becoming perceptible when no external sound provides contrast. Some traditions interpret this as spiritual phenomenon. Neuroscience interprets it as perception of the nervous system's own functioning. Both perspectives may be true. A neurological phenomenon experienced as meaningful encounter with consciousness itself. Before modern electric lighting, humans lived by circadian rhythms that included natural periods of silence. Evenings brought darkness and quiet. Sleep lasted longer. Awakenings in the night were considered normal and often spent in silent reflection. Research on pre-industrial sleep patterns suggests our ancestors experienced what historians call first sleep and second sleep, separated by an hour or two of quiet wakefulness. Studies found that when modern subjects replicate these conditions, no artificial light, no sound, 14 hours of darkness, many spontaneously develop this bimodal sleep pattern and report the nighttime quiet period as deeply peaceful. This suggests the human nervous system may be adapted for more silence than we currently provided. Digital devices have replaced natural silence with artificial connection. The average person unlocks their phone approximately 90 times daily, creating a portable soundtrack of notifications, content, and interaction. This constant availability fragments attention into smaller and smaller units. When researchers disabled subjects' phones for 24 hours, many reported initial anxiety followed by surprising relief and a rediscovery of sustained thought, deeper conversation, and awareness of their immediate environment. That constant connectivity had gradually eroded. The phone serves as noise generator, filling every potential moment of quiet with scrolling and messaging. Breaking this pattern, even briefly, reveals how thoroughly silence has disappeared from daily experience. Social norms actively discourage silence. Research examining conversational patterns found that pauses longer than 4 seconds create social discomfort, pressure for someone to speak. Extended silences are interpreted as awkwardness, disconnection, or rudeness. This norm varies by culture. Some Asian and Nordic cultures tolerate longer silences, but most Western contexts treat silence as a problem to be solved. This social pressure means individuals rarely experience shared silence, missing the opportunity to connect in quiet presence. The research notes that this norm may be intensifying. Analysis of films and television shows from different decades found that pause duration has decreased, creating media that model increasingly rapid, silenceless interaction. Younger generations raised on this content may have even less tolerance for quiet than previous ones. The voice in your head, your inner dialogue, narrates experience constantly. Research on internal speech found that most people maintain an almost continuous stream of verbal thought, averaging over 16 hours daily. This narrator comments, judges, plans, remembers, creating a layer of language between direct experience and consciousness. Silence practice gradually reduces inner speech activity. Long-term meditators report periods of consciousness with clear awareness, but no verbal content, seeing without naming what is seen, feeling without labeling the feeling. Brain imaging confirms reduced activity in language centers during these states. This isn't unconsciousness or diminished awareness, but a different mode of consciousness. One that ancient traditions have described for millennia, but that neuroscience is only now beginning to map. Social media makes silence psychologically difficult by creating illusion of others' constant activity. Research found that individuals who use social media frequently report feeling they should be doing something productive or social during quiet moments. The curated feeds showing others' activities create pressure to always be engaged, always be interesting, always be publicly visible. Silence and solitude come to feel like failure or missing out. Experimental studies where subjects voluntarily abstained from social media for 2 weeks showed significant reductions in this anxiety, with many reporting rediscovering ability to simply be quiet without feeling inadequate. The comparison trap operates even in silence. People compare their quiet present moment to imagined exciting moments happening elsewhere. For most of human history, silence was abundant and valued. Anthropological research examining contemporary hunter-gatherer societies finds that they spend significantly more time in quiet than industrialized populations, hours of silence during daily activities, evening periods with only crackling fire and occasional conversation, sleeping hours free from mechanical noise. These societies report low rates of anxiety disorders and insomnia despite lacking modern medicine or comfort. The contrast suggests that perhaps the problem isn't modern people being poorly adapted to modern life, but modern life being poorly adapted to human neurobiology. We evolved in silence-rich environments and may require such environments for optimal psychological functioning. Silence improves productivity, yet modern work culture minimizes it. Research comparing worker performance in different office environments found that individuals with access to private quiet spaces produced higher quality work and reported greater job satisfaction than those in open offices, despite open offices being designed to maximize collaboration. The productivity paradox is that the time spent in silence seems unproductive, no visible activity, no meetings, no communication. Yet it's during these periods that complex thinking, problem-solving, and integration occur. Organizations that build quiet time into their culture show better long-term performance. But the individual employees who take this time often feel guilty, as if they're not really working. The bias toward visible activity over internal processing runs deep. Silence can activate ancient fear circuits for some people. Research on individual differences in silence tolerance found that certain individuals show heightened emotional activation during silence, while others show relaxation. The pattern correlated with childhood attachment experiences. Those with histories of trauma or neglect were more likely to find silence unsettling rather than peaceful. For these individuals, silence may have been associated with danger, the quiet before punishment, the absence of protective presence, the Adayam time when vulnerability felt high. This helps explain why silence interventions don't work equally for everyone, and why some people require support and safety to gradually develop comfort with quiet. True silence is increasingly rare in modern environments. Acoustic researchers working with the National Park Service have attempted to map quiet areas across the United States, defining quiet as ambient sound below 35 decibels. They found that such areas now exist primarily in extremely remote locations, deep wilderness, desert regions, protected parks. The average American can go days or weeks without experiencing genuine quiet. Even rural areas now have agricultural equipment, distant traffic, airplane noise. The elimination of silence has happened gradually over a century, so imperceptibly that most people don't realize what's been lost. Children born in the 2020s may grow up, never experiencing true silence, potentially with lasting effects on development we haven't yet discovered. Real listening requires silence, both external and internal. Communication research examined what differentiates effective listeners from poor ones. The key distinction wasn't intelligence or empathy, but the ability to remain internally silent while the other person speaks. Poor listeners plan their response, judge what's being said, or drift to unrelated thoughts. Good listeners maintain a state of receptive silence, allowing the speaker's words to land without immediate reaction. Brain imaging during listening tasks showed that effective listeners had reduced activity in self-referential processing regions and increased activity in theory of mind networks. They had temporarily silenced their own mental chatter to create space for another's experience. This skill correlates with relationship satisfaction, professional success, and general emotional intelligence. People surrounded by noise can feel profoundly alone, while those in silence can feel deeply connected. Research on loneliness found weak correlation between time spent alone and feelings of loneliness. Instead, loneliness correlated with quality of presence during social interaction. Individuals reporting high loneliness often spent significant time with others, but in noisy, distracting environments where genuine connection was difficult. Conversely, those practicing regular solitude and silence reported lower loneliness and stronger sense of connection to themselves, others, and something larger. The research suggests that silence creates the psychological space necessary for genuine connection, first with oneself, then with others. Without this space, we can be constantly with people yet never truly together. Across religions and spiritual traditions, silence is where people report encountering the sacred, whether described as God, emptiness, Brahman, the Tao, or pure awareness. The direct experience that mystics and contemplatives throughout history have described happens in profound silence. Research examining mystical experiences found that they share common phenomenological features regardless of religious context: sense of unity, transcendence of time and space, ineffability, noetic quality. These experiences occur more frequently during prolonged silence than during any other condition. The research doesn't confirm or deny the metaphysical reality of what's encountered, but it documents that silence appears to be the universal gateway to these transformative experiences. The transition from waking to sleep is inherently silent. Research on sleep onset found that the first moments of sleep are always preceded by a reduction in internal mental noise. Studies tracked both brain waves and subjective reports of mental activity as subject fell asleep. Even those with racing thoughts reported that at the actual moment of sleep onset, the thoughts suddenly ceased, a brief silence before consciousness reorganized into dream. This suggests that one reason insomnia is so difficult may be that people cannot create this internal silence voluntarily. Thoughts continue generating automatically, preventing the quiet necessary for sleep to begin. Silence practices during the day may train this capacity, making the evening transition easier. Trauma can be held in silence as much as in words. Research on trauma therapy found that many traumatic memories exist in implicit, non-verbal form: body sensations, emotional states, fragmented images without narrative structure. Talking therapy helps some people, but not everyone. A growing body of research supports silence-based approaches: somatic experiencing, mindfulness-based trauma therapy, silent meditation retreats, adapted for trauma survivors. These approaches allow trauma to be processed through direct awareness rather than verbal narration. In carefully supported silence, survivors report being able to stay with difficult sensations and memories long enough for them to naturally resolve. The silence provides a safe container where experience can unfold, without the pressure to make sense or explain before ready. By 65 facts in, the pattern is unmistakable. Silence doesn't create healing, it removes the interference that prevents healing. every system in your body already knows how to rest. Silence simply gives permission. Silence before eating changes relationship with food. Research on mindful eating found that taking just 2 minutes of silence before meals led to eating approximately less food, taking longer to eat, and reporting greater satisfaction. The silence appeared to interrupt automatic eating patterns and create space for noticing actual hunger versus emotional eating. The practice worked better than counting calories or restricting food types because it addressed the psychological drivers of overconsumption rather than just the behavior itself. Subjects reported the silence helped them notice when they were eating from stress, boredom, or habit, rather than genuine physical need. The practice essentially restored conscious choice about eating. Cultures throughout history have honored silence at death. Research examining end-of-life care found that dying patients and their families often report the final hours and days as being characterized by increasing silence, less need for words, more simply being present together. Healthcare workers trained in palliative care describe learning to be comfortable with this silence, resisting the urge to fill it with cheerfulness or distraction. The silence serves important functions. It acknowledges the magnitude of what's happening, creates space for final emotional processing, and paradoxically makes people feel less alone than attempts at normal conversation would. The silence says, "This moment is too important for small talk, and I'm here with you in it." The silence after sound is not the same as the silence before. Research on auditory perception found that silence following sound is perceived differently than preceding silence, despite measuring identically. The brain apparently treats them as distinct phenomena. Post-sound silence feels fuller, charged with the echo of what just passed. Pre-sound silence feels open, anticipatory. This distinction appears in language. The pause after someone speaks carries their words. The pause before they speak holds possibility. This research illuminates why the quality of silence changes throughout a day, evening, or meditation session. Each silence is colored by what came before and what might come next, never truly empty, but always contextual. Winter naturally brings more silence as nature quiets. Research on seasonal psychology found that winter months in temperate climates correlate with reduced ambient noise, less birdsong, less insect activity, less rain, fewer people outside. Historical analysis suggests that pre-industrial societies used this natural quiet period for rest, reflection, and reduced activity. Modern life, with artificial light and heat removing the pressures of winter, maintains the same pace year-round. Some researchers suggest this contributes to seasonal affective disorder. Not just reduced light, but loss of the seasonal rhythm that included winter's natural silence and inwardness. Experiments with voluntarily embracing winter quiet showed improved mood in many participants, particularly those who normally experienced winter depression. Long-term couples develop shared silence. Research on relationship development followed couples over 10 years, measuring their comfort with silence during different relationship stages. Early relationships showed discomfort with silence beyond 3 seconds. After years together, comfortable silence averaged over a minute, with some couples sitting together for extended periods without speaking. This shared silence correlated strongly with relationship satisfaction and longevity. The silence wasn't avoidance or lack of connection, but rather mature intimacy, no longer needing constant verifications of the other's presence, comfortable with separate internal experiences while physically together. The ability to be alone together may be the ultimate marker of secure attachment. Regular silence practice builds cognitive reserve that protects against age-related decline. Longitudinal research following older adults over 15 years found that those with consistent silence-based practices, meditation, quiet contemplation, daily rest periods, showed slower rates of cognitive decline and maintained better executive function. Brain imaging revealed maintained or even increased gray matter volume in regions typically showing age-related atrophy. The mechanism appears to involve neuroplasticity, ongoing maintenance, and generation of neural connections that silence promotes. The research suggests that the busyness culture that fills every moment with activity may not just reduce quality of life, but actually accelerate cognitive aging. Humans aren't the only species that seeks silence. Research on animal behavior documents that many species show preferences for quiet periods and become distressed by chronic noise. Birds alter their songs or abandon territories near highways. Whales change migration patterns to avoid shipping lanes. Even plants show stress responses to vibration and sound. This suggests that sensitivity to acoustic environment isn't cultural or learned, but deeply biological, shared across millions of years of evolution. The rapid elimination of natural quiet areas over the past century represents a change to planetary acoustic environment unprecedented in the history of life on Earth, with consequences we're only beginning to understand. Silence improves decision-making. Research on judgment and choice found that individuals who spent 30 minutes in silence before making important decisions showed more consistent preferences, less regret, and better alignment between values and choices. The silence appeared to allow deeper processing and integration of different considerations. Brain imaging showed increased connectivity between emotional and rational processing regions during the silent decision period. Participants reported that the silence helped them distinguish authentic preferences from social pressures, immediate desires from long-term values. The research challenges the modern emphasis on rapid decision-making and suggests that the old advice to sleep on it may be scientifically sound, not because time passes, but because silence intervenes. Living in constant noise creates habituation where silence becomes intense. Research examined individuals moving from urban to rural environments. Initially, many reported the rural quiet as disturbing, preventing sleep, creating anxiety. This reversed after several weeks as their auditory systems recalibrated. The initial disturbance came from what researchers call negative habituation. The nervous system had adapted to expect constant noise and interprets its absence as potential threat. Similarly, people living in noise-filled environments often don't realize how loud their daily life is until they experience contrast. The research suggests that habituation makes it difficult to assess what level of noise is actually healthy, potentially trapping people in acoustic environments that chronically stress their nervous systems without their awareness. Could silence be the next public health intervention? By fact 75, the evidence seems overwhelming. Research across multiple disciplines, neuroscience, psychology, public health, environmental science, converges on the conclusion that silence is not luxury, but necessity. The absence of adequate silence correlates with higher rates of cardiovascular disease, sleep disorders, anxiety, depression, and cognitive decline. Yet silence continues to disappear from modern life, treated as empty time rather than essential resource. Some researchers and activists now advocate for silence rights, protecting quiet areas, limiting noise pollution, designing cities with acoustic health in mind. The research suggests this isn't about returning to pre-industrial life, but about designing modern existence to include the silence human neurobiology requires. The revolution may not be loud at all. It may be a quiet reclaiming of what was taken without our noticing. You might be feeling tired now. That's perfectly fine. Breathe slowly. Feel the cycles. Your breath, inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. A small cycle within the vast universe of experience. Your consciousness, waking, sleeping, dreaming. You are also part of that eternal movement. You don't need to hold on to anything. Let everything unfold in its perfect order, like planets silently rotating in their orbits, unhurried, unresisting, simply existing. We're almost there now. Before the universe began, there was silence. Not silence as absence of sound, but silence as pure potential. All the noise that would ever exist throughout cosmic history existed first as infinite quiet. Then something broke the silence. Energy burst forth, space expanded, and for the first time, vibration became possible. The echo of that first moment still fills the universe as cosmic microwave background radiation. We live inside that ancient sound, descendants of the silence that preceded everything. At the smallest scales, physics can measure. Nothing stays silent. Quantum fluctuations create and destroy particles constantly. Yet these fluctuations don't produce sound as we understand it. Perhaps this is what silence really is. Not the opposite of sound, but its ground, the substrate from which all specific sounds emerge and to which they return. Silence doesn't exclude vibration. It contains all possible vibrations in their unmanifested form. Music exists because of silence. Every note is defined by the silence around it, every rhythm by the pause between beats. Without silence, music would be continuous tone, meaningless and unbearable. Mozart said, "The music is not in the notes, but in the silence between." The notes tell you what to think, the silence lets you feel it. Silence makes language possible. Between words, between sentences, silence provides the structure that allows meaning. Try to imagine speech without pauses, words running together, no breath, no separation. It becomes incomprehensible. The silence organizes sound into units our minds can process. The pause after a question holds space for answer to form. The pause after revelation lets truth settle. Deep underwater, there is profound quiet. In the deepest ocean trenches, beneath miles of pressure, silence approaches. The few creatures living at those depths navigate by touch and chemical sensing, not sound. They experience the world in near total quiet, pressed against the ocean floor, in darkness and stillness. Yet they live, they survive. Silence for them is not deprivation, but home. In desert darkness, silence becomes almost visible. Without moisture to carry sound, without vegetation to rustle, the quiet becomes so complete, it seems to have texture. People describe desert silence as thick, present, palpable. Your heartbeat becomes the loudest thing in the world. Time loses its usual markers. The desert at night teaches that silence isn't negative space but its own dimension of experience. Fresh snow absorbs sound. The crystalline structure of snowflakes traps air in millions of tiny pockets, creating natural sound insulation. A landscape covered in new snow becomes eerily quiet. Traffic noise muffled, voices deadened, footsteps softer. This acoustic dampening contributes to the peaceful feeling many report during snowfall. The world becomes muted, gentle, wrapped in white silence. Old-growth forests create pockets of profound silence. The dense canopy absorbs sound waves. The thick carpet of fallen needles deadens footsteps. Massive tree trunks block wind. Walking into ancient forest, you can feel the silence descend. The silence isn't empty, but full of life conducting its business in whispers. These forests are disappearing globally, and with them, some of the quietest places humans have ever known. Deep caves offer silence, unlike anywhere above ground. Cut off from surface weather, isolated from life, cave systems maintain quiet that has lasted millions of years. The silence is so complete that visitors report hearing their own blood flowing, their joints creaking, the electrical hum of their nervous systems. The cave simply continues its ancient stillness, indifferent to human presence. Some people report finding silence within even amid noise. Experienced meditators describe cultivating internal quiet that persists regardless of external environment. They can stand in crowded airports, busy streets, loud parties, and maintain inner stillness. The external sounds continue. They're not deaf, but the sounds don't disturb the quiet center. Perhaps the ultimate silence isn't found by removing sound, but by changing how consciousness holds whatever sounds arise. Digital silence is different from analog silence. When a phone call drops, when a video buffers, we experience what researchers call digital quiet, a perfect absence of signal. It feels empty in ways that natural silence doesn't. Natural silence contains subtle sounds, variations in air pressure, the presence of space. Digital silence is literally nothing, zero information, a void. As people age, many report appreciating silence more deeply. Whether this reflects wisdom gained through experience or changes in sensory processing, older individuals often show greater tolerance for quiet and less need for stimulation. They speak of having heard enough of valuing peace over excitement. The pattern suggests that silence may be something we grow into, learning its value gradually across a lifetime. Children naturally seek quiet more than modern parenting sometimes allows. Research finds that children given opportunity to play in silence engage in more creative, sustained play. They imagine more freely. Modern childhood often lacks quiet, scheduled activities. Children need silence for healthy development of internal life, imagination, and self-regulation. Space is not silent in the way movies suggest. Planets emit radio frequencies. Stars produce electromagnetic waves. NASA has translated various space phenomena into audible sound, revealing that the universe is full of whistles, hums, crashes. Yet from human perspective in spacecraft, astronauts report absolute silence. Looking at Earth from orbit in that silence, many report profound psychological shifts. The silence of space helps humans understand their place in the cosmos. Different cultures have different relationships with silence. Japanese culture includes the meaningful spaces between things. Many indigenous cultures practice long silences in group settings. Nordic cultures allow long conversational pauses without discomfort. These cultural differences reveal that tolerance for silence and interpretation of its meaning are learned, not innate. Early morning before human activity begins offers daily opportunity for silence. The period between 4 and 6 a.m. in most places remains relatively quiet. Many traditions recommend waking for prayer or meditation during these hours, because the quiet makes practice easier. The morning silence, even in cities, provides daily renewal of the quiet that sustains consciousness. Near death, many people become quieter. Hospice workers describe a pattern where actively dying patients withdraw into increasing silence, less speech, less interest in interaction. Eyes closed more often. This appears to be natural psychological process. The inner world becomes more compelling than the outer. The silence appears to serve as transition space. Those who recover often report that the silence was peaceful, not frightening. Silence is something you get better at. First attempts often feel impossible. The mind races, the body fidgets, time crawls, but with repeated practice, something shifts. The mind learns that silence won't harm it. The practice becomes easier, then pleasant, then something actively sought. Silence tolerance is skill, muscle that strengthens with use. The first step is simply sitting still for 5 minutes daily. Libraries maintain silence not just for concentration, but as sacred space. The enforced quiet signals that this place is different, set apart, devoted to thought and learning. The silence creates conditions for deep reading, sustained attention, engagement with ideas. Those who use libraries for research consistently report that the quiet remains the most valuable thing. Libraries offer an increasingly rare public space where silence is protected. Turning a phone to silent mode is a tiny act of resistance. It asserts that your time, your attention, your consciousness deserve protection from constant interruption. Yet most people feel anxiety about doing it. What if you miss something important? This anxiety reveals how thoroughly the expectation of constant availability has penetrated consciousness. Silence mode means creating boundaries around attention, reclaiming some periods as protected time. As hearing deteriorates, silence becomes permanent. For those losing hearing, the irony is painful. They spent years in noise, perhaps contributing to the damage, and now silence is imposed involuntarily. Yet many who become deaf report that the silence, while initially distressing, eventually becomes acceptable, even peaceful. They describe the silence as having qualities they never noticed when hearing was intact. What will be the last sound you hear? Throughout your life you'll hear billions of sounds, and then, at some point, one final sound before silence becomes permanent. You won't know when it happens. It might be meaningful, a loved one's voice, or utterly mundane, rain on window, someone coughing. The randomness highlights how little control we have. Every sound we hear now is somehow both ordinary and precious. Your heartbeat creates rhythm of sound and silence. Between each beat, in the pause when the chambers fill, there is momentary quiet. This rhythm marks your entire life. Sound, silence, sound, silence, until it stops. In deep rest or meditation, you can become aware of the silence between beats. This internal rhythm connects you to all living things that have ever existed. Imagine if everyone stopped talking at once. Just for a minute. 7 billion humans suddenly silent together. What would we hear? The wind, perhaps. Birds singing. The hum of infrastructure we've built. Our own breathing. The collective quiet would reveal the baseline sound of the world humans have created, the acoustic environment beneath the constant chatter. So what does silence reveal? 100 facts later, the answer isn't information but understanding. Silence reveals what was always there, but usually unnoticed, the body's quiet symphony, consciousness itself. It shows that peace isn't something to achieve, but something to uncover by removing what obscures it. The power of silence isn't that it creates anything new. It reveals what already is. In the end, silence is the condition where truth becomes audible. Not truth as facts, but truth as direct experience of existence. The silence was always here, patient waiting. You just needed the quiet to finally hear it. And so, our quiet journey through silence comes to a gentle close. We've traveled from the nature of silence as something the brain actively perceives to the deep cellular healing that quiet provides, discovering along the way that silence isn't absence, but presence. From the psychological truths of why we avoid silence to the wisdom of why we need it, we've glimpsed how quiet is both ancient necessity and modern luxury. The patterns we've explored, the nervous system's longing for rest, the consciousness that emerges when noise finally stops, all point toward the same truth. Silence reveals what was always there, waiting patiently for the noise to pause. Silence reminds us that the most important things often happen in quiet. Much of healing occurs without fanfare, cells repairing, neurons connecting, consciousness integrating experience, all in the gentle darkness of rest. Silence reveals patience, presence, the simple fact of being alive in this moment, without needing to justify or explain. Without silence, we lose touch with these subtle processes, mistaking activity for life and noise for meaning. By pausing to simply be quiet, we glimpse the extraordinary in the ordinary, breath, continuing, heart beating, awareness, witnessing it all. In these final minutes, take the deepest breath you can, as deep as possible. Think about unity, the connection between every moment of silence throughout time. You are not separate from the vast quiet that existed before sound began, that exists between each heartbeat, that waits patiently in every gap between thoughts. You are awareness itself, sometimes filled with sound, sometimes resting in quiet, but always here, always witnessing. Let your entire being dissolve into the vast silence, into the space where all sound emerges and returns. Prepare for deep sleep, no boundaries left, only peace. This thoughtful journey through silence creates peaceful spaces for tired minds. A gentle like and subscribe helps other silent seekers discover this quiet sanctuary too. One peaceful night, one sleepy soul at a time. But there's no need to do anything now. Nothing at all. You've traveled far tonight, deeper into quiet than most journeys take you. You can allow these thoughts of silence to fade now, like whispers dissolving into dawn light, leaving only the peaceful calm behind. Let your breathing deepen. Let your body feel heavier, as if silence itself has weight and you're sinking into it like soft snow. If sleep comes, let it carry you like a tide, pulling gently toward dark water, smoothly, inevitably, into a realm where even thought becomes silent. If your eyes are still open, the next video is waiting for you. But if they're closed, stay there. Stay in the darkness that feels safe and warm, the silence that needs nothing from you. Tomorrow the world will return with all its noise and demand. The sounds will call you back, but tonight belongs to stillness. Rest well, quiet friend. And remember, in all the noise of living, silence was never gone. It was simply waiting for you to stop and listen. Fall asleep to gentle facts, where science meets sleep. Dream deeper with bedtime science. Relax, listen, and drift into sleep. Goo.